Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members. This is the Save Women's Sports Act that passed with bipartisan support yesterday. This bill is about fairness. On behalf of Texas' 227,000 female college athletes and all our daughters and granddaughters, there's someone there, I don't think I can move passage.
Mr. Manuel, for what purpose?
Yes, will the gentlelady yield for just a few questions?
Certainly.
Thank you, Rep.
She yields.
I have a quick question. The definition for the athletic competition is a little broad and seems to cover multiple areas for university or departments. And I know yesterday we were talking about the NCAA and intramural sports, but for instance, if a university's or a student life department wants to have a friendly competition day, does this affect them by any chance at all? Like if a Greek organization is having their sister or brother fraternity coming together to play sports, would this affect them at all in that case?
Well, my bill is about sports, and it has to be intercollegiate. As far as exact details, I would have to hear more about it.
Okay, well, so this only would affect personal and economic. So this isn't like, again, like two fraternities coming together, having a competition. This wouldn't affect them because it wouldn't be an NCAA sport, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Again, this bill's about fairness. On behalf of Texas' 227,000 female college athletes and all of our daughters and granddaughters, I move passage.
The chair recognizes Ms. Gonzalez in opposition to the bill.
I thought that was too easy.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Valerie. Mr. Speaker, members, we are legislating something that is not an issue here in Texas. And there are already regulations in place on the national level, and we are ignoring actual issues that are going on right now in women's sports. There are less resources, less funding, and more sexual harassment prevalent in women's sports. And instead of focusing on those very important issues, we are instead focusing on harming an already vulnerable group. Transgender athletes in intercollegiate sports have been brought under scrutiny ever since politicians and other folks have used them as pawns in our political games. These athletes are not a threat to women's sports. The NCAA, the NAIA, and many other athletic governing boards have laid out regulations for a fair and equitable athletic competition between all athletes, regardless of being cisgender or transgender. I have to reemphasize that the governing boards are already doing what we are already addressing equity and fairness. So what we need to do is really stay out of their way, not be big government. This bill seeks to supersede what each of the governing boards have...
Mr. Toth, for what purpose?
Will the gentlelady yield for some questions?
May I finish?
You bet.
After she finishes.
This board seeks to supersede what each governing board is already doing or has done, and instead place a strict ban on transgender athletes. This is incredibly harmful for a multitude of reasons. First, women's sports as a whole suffer when transgender students are excluded. For example, a study done in 2021 shows that trans-inclusive athletic policies have higher participation rates in all sports for all girls, not just transgender women. This bill would place a microscope on all female athletes by allowing anyone to bring civil action against a university or team that they believe might have allowed a transgender athlete on their team. Every female athlete would then have to be conscious of their hormone levels, their physical abilities in their sports, or if they appeal to overall appeal to the overall ideal of femininity. If for whatever reason a single person believes that a university or team is in violation of this bill, they can take the institution or sports team to court without any proof. The implementation of this legislation would also be an ineffective use of our state funds. Under this legislation, the Higher Education Coordinating Board would be tasked with a regulation of intercollegiate athletics. This is something they have never been tasked with before.
Members, please take your conversations outside the room.
Texas public institutions and certain sports, Texas public institution would be operating regulations that are directly contradictory to the NCAA, the NAIA, and which would create disadvantages specifically for our out-of-state institutions. Once again, this body is faced with a decision on a piece of legislation that relies on fear and misinformation to support writing discrimination into our law. A bill that does not solve any documented problems in Texas and address an issue that has already been addressed by the experts and the intercollegiate athletic leaders that we have. This discriminatory bill is motivated to an attempt to affect one small, vulnerable population of Texas. I urge you to consider if this is really about protecting women's sports. Like I mentioned in the beginning, there are very real things that we should be addressing when it comes to women's sports, or if it's really about, and if not, then what is this really about? And what is our role here in this legislature, in this building and on this floor? Please vote no on this bill. It is doing nothing but harming Texas universities, the Texas economy, and most importantly, Texas women.
Mr. Toth, for what purpose?
Will the gentlelady yield for
Will
questions?
the lady
Yes.
yields for questions?
Representative, do you know what the difference is between muscle weight between a natural woman and a trans woman?
I think there's some flaws to your question, Representative
Sure.
Toth.
Why don't you share that with me?
I think that that there's lots of misinformation and a lot of stereotypes about trans women and bodily type.
A study in the Journal of Applied Physiology found that trans women had an average of 26 pounds more skeletal muscle mass than natural women. Does that not apply?
I think that no trans woman, like no woman, like no man, like no trans man is the same. I think that what the governing boards have been doing is addressing sports by sports, but what we're doing here with this bill is literally banning even sports that don't have any trans athletes. We are literally banning all trans students from participating in healthy, important school activities.
I know it was ruled that it wasn't germane to the bill yesterday when the question was asked, what is a woman? Can you tell me what a trans woman is?
I think that we've had lots of conversations about trans identity on this floor, and I would love to not participate in reinforcing the negative rhetoric that we have.
Not
I would
negative.
just rather
We're having a
focus on
discussion
why
about
this
why
bill.
a trans woman
I'm so
should or should not be able to compete against natural women at the college level. This is the whole issue of this bill. What is the difference? What is a trans woman?
I've literally laid out in my opposition speech why this bill is harmful. You don't have to agree with me, but I've expressed it's harmful to the economy.
Is there a difference?
It's harmful to all students.
Is there a
It's
difference?
reinforcing a discriminatory rhetoric and misinformation and stereotypes. And you don't have to agree, Representative Toth. That is your choice. But I think this line of questioning is potentially problematic.
Gross measure of body strength suggests that a natural females are approximately 50 to 60%, only as 50 to 60% as strong in upper body strength as a man. Is that not relevant?
I think what is relevant is that the legislature is pushing a complete ban, the most extreme piece of legislation, as opposed to allowing the governing bodies, which are addressing fairness and putting in rules and regulations on their own without us interfering.
So a biological male, let's say, that competes in the javelin throw, and then becomes a trans female, what is the difference in the weight of the javelin between a man and a woman's sport competition at the collegiate level?
I would really invite you to listen to this opposition speech that I gave.
How about a shot put? What's
I
the
think
difference?
that it's very important that we don't reinforce
Do you know that the women's shot
negative
put is half the
stereotypes,
weight?
and I think that this line
The
of
woman's shot
questioning
put
is
is half the weight of a men's
trying to
shot put?
create and perpetuate misinformation.
That's misinformation?
I think that
No,
here's
it actually is. A men's shot put is 16 pounds. A woman's shot put is 8.82 pounds. That's not misinformation.
Members, let's please refrain from talking over one another.
How about a basketball, Representative? Men's basketball circumference is 29.5 inches. Do you know what a women's basketball circumference is?
like I said, the bill, or what we are talking about, is to allow for the governing bodies
Thank
to
you.
make the rules and regulations.
Ms. Howard,
Speaker?
for what purpose?
Would the lady yield?
Will the lady yield?
Of course.
The lady yields for questions.
Thank you. Rather than focusing on these definitions and what's the different sports and all the things that we've been hearing about like this morning, the fact is we know that this is a non-issue. It's not impacting any of the universities in our state right now. There's none that have been identified. That being said, there are a lot of ways, as you have pointed out, with national organizations that have looked at what criteria could we use to have as fair a level playing field as possible. Isn't that correct?
Yes, without being exclusive. I think that every study shows that all students, we're talking about students, right? And we're not even talking about the more higher level collegiate sports. We're even talking about clubs and groups on campuses. And so the individual governing bodies are making these decisions. And we were in higher ed and we heard testimony, not one
I'm
university.
Sorry. Mr. Speaker, I can't hear her.
The gentlelady's time's expired.
Mr. Speaker,
Ms. Howard, for what purpose?
I'd like to move to extend the time.
Unfortunately, members, starting today, all speeches are limited to 10 minutes and cannot be extended.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The chair recognizes Ms. Swanson to close on the bill.
I just say the same lines over and over
Yeah,
again.
no, say it again. It's fine.
Okay. Yes, yes. Oh, is she answering?
Chair recognizes Ms. Swanson to close on the bill. Ms. Howard,
Mr.
for what
Speaker,
purpose?
Thank you. Would the lady yield?
The lady yield for questions.
Certainly.
She yields.
Thank you. I was going to ask Representative Gonzalez about this, but I'll go ahead and ask you as the author of the legislation. I know that you have information in here that indicates that the biological sex is going to be determined by the official birth certificate. Is that correct?
Yes, the birth certificate that is issued at or near the time of birth, and this is the same as what we put in House Bill 25 almost 2 years ago in the third special session.
And are you aware of whether or not institutions of higher education in our state currently require birth certificates for admission and enrollment to their institutions or to their athletic programs?
My understanding is that they do, but this is why we're turning this over to the Higher Education Coordinating Board so that they can set up the general guidelines.
Well, I'm going to let you know that in talking to the University of Texas, they do not require birth certificates for admissions. So, did you know that?
You just advised me. Thank
Okay.
you.
So, I'm concerned, and I'm asking you about the section that says a person may bring a civil action for injunctive relief against an institution of higher education or an intercollegiate athletic team that violates this section. So my question would be, if they do not collect this information, they do not collect birth certificates right now, and I know you said that co-board would set up rules, but if they don't have that information, and if someone doesn't reveal that they happen to be transgender, how is the institution supposed to know and be able to be in a position to where they cannot have this suit brought against them? It seems like that's potentially harmful to our higher education institutions.
Thank you for that question, Representative Howard. I would anticipate that in the new rules that the Higher Education Coordinating Board will issue, that they most likely will have the educational institutions start collecting birth certificates for athletics. It only makes sense.
So you're assuming then that what the co-board is going to do is come up with rules that require all of our higher education institutions to begin to collect birth certificates to participate in athletic activities at the institutions. Is that what you're suggesting is probably going to happen?
That would be what I would anticipate. Again, I'm not on that board, as none of us are, and
well, I think it's going to be really important that we figure that out, though. If they're going to be potentially held liable, that's a big deal for them to be held liable. And it says that it has to be entered at or near the time of the student's birth or modified to correct a Scrivener or clerical error. How is the institution supposed to determine that?
again, it would be up to the person who brought the civil liability, and they would present evidence. We can all wait and see what the rules are. They are very used to doing this sort of thing. They can also look at how does UIL handle it and other states, and I'm sure they will come up with very practical guidelines.
Well, I think it is something we need to be very cautious about and realize that what this legislation is doing is potentially setting up our higher education institutions throughout our state, as well as the intercollegiate athletic teams, to have suits brought against them for perhaps things that they are not even aware of. Perhaps they don't even know that a person is transgender. They wouldn't even know to look at the birth certificate. And even if they had all the birth certificates, how would they necessarily know if it's accurate or not if this is a person who hasn't presented themselves as transgender but happens to be? I think it's a particularly difficult thing, and it's not something I think that will be received well by our higher education institutions. So thank you.
I would like to comment on that. We have had the exact opposite. The higher institutions feel like they will not have any problem implementing this, and if you have read the bill, you realize they cannot sue for dollar amounts. It's only injunctive relief. So this does not put any liability or any problem on our schools. So on the behalf of all of our daughters, granddaughters, and the 227,000 female athletes in Texas, please vote yes. I move passage.
The question occurs on final passage of SB15. This is a record vote. The clerk ring the bell. Show Ms. Swanson voting aye. Show Mr. Leach voting aye. Show Ms. Hinojosa voting nay. Have all members voted? There being 95 ayes, 50 nays, SB15 is finally passed.